Hey there, Sönke here from Stackable. Today I'd like to show you a tool that'll make your day-to-day life with Kubernetes just so much easier. The tool I'm going to show you is called K9s, and it's a command line interface to Kubernetes. Part 1, which we'll be airing today, is generic actions, navigating lists and stuff like that. And then in part 2, we look at some more involved content like specific actions that you can execute on specific types of objects and stuff like that. So stay tuned. So, the first time you start up K9s, it'll present you with this view, which is basically just a list of all the pods that are running inside of your Kubernetes cluster. You can see up front here, it shows you stuff across namespaces, but we'll get to that a bit later. And of course, you're not just limited to looking at pods. You can look at pretty much any object that resides in your Kubernetes cluster. So for example, by hitting colon, and just starting to type, and then with tab you can autocomplete and look at deployments, for example. So you see a list of all the deployments across all namespaces in this cluster. Or you could look at stateful sets. Maybe you're more interested in config maps. Quite a few of them in here. But you can also look at custom resource definitions, for example. So Stackable brings with it quite a few custom resource definitions to define the clusters. So one of those, for example, would be the Trino cluster object, and you can see there's one already deployed here which kind of describes the Trino cluster that we deployed into this Kubernetes. And as I mentioned just a second ago, you're not limited to just looking at one namespace. So let's switch back to the pods, for example, and you can see there's quite a few pods across quite a few namespaces listed here. And namespaces are treated by K9s just like any other old Kubernetes object. So you can switch to the namespace view, and this lists all the namespaces that exist in your cluster. So by now hitting enter on the Stackable operators namespace, for example, we limit ourselves to just looking at this namespace, as indicated by the stuff up top here. And then to make it easier to switch back and forth between often or frequently used namespaces, there's a couple of shortcuts that K9s displays for you up top here. So if I now hit 0, I go back to looking at all namespaces. Hitting 3 shows me just the default namespace, and then by typing 2, I can go back to looking at my Stackable operators namespace. But not just namespaces. You can also switch Kubernetes contexts if you feel like it. So if you go to the context list, these are a few clusters that I have here in my K9s. So I could now, by hitting enter on the LNAV cluster, I could simply switch to that cluster, and you can see there's a whole other bunch of pods in here. But for today, we'll stick to our kind cluster because this is what we know and where we live. And we'll look at all objects again. And let's take a look at what all we can do with this list. So far, we've just navigated the system with this list and looked at different types of objects. But obviously, sometimes you also want to interact with these objects or look for specific objects. So for example, if I'm in this case only interested in the Trino pods, I can simply type / start typing Trino, and this will give me a filtered down list to show just the Trino pods that I'm interested in. If I now, for example, want to delete one or two of those, I can mark them with a spacebar, or by hitting Control and spacebar, I can also mark a range of pods to work with. And then I can affect these with actions that K9s offers me, which I'll talk about in just a second. What we can also do is we can sort this list by things. So right now, as you can see up top front here, it's sorted by namespace and then name of the pod. But if we type question mark, you can see there's quite a bit of stuff that we can sort by. So for example, we could sort by age. Let's try that. Shift A. Now you can see back here 8 minutes, 15 minutes. So basically now all these pods have been sorted by age. So that's quite a nice thing if you look for something specific in these lists. So you can also filter the list down to just pods that had an error in the past few minutes or something like that, which makes it nice to drill down into where stuff went wrong. Right, and that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2, in which we look at some more involved actions and how to really leverage K9s for your benefit.